Ciao a tutti! My name is Facundo and today we will talk about how to view and react without a head. First of all, I want to introduce myself. As I said, my name is Facundo Giuliani. I'm a developer relations engineer at Storyblok. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm also a Prisma ambassador. Prisma is an ORM that we can use to connect to our databases in our projects. I'm an Auth0 ambassador. Auth0 is a platform that we can use to add security to our applications. And I'm a Cloudinary media developer expert. Cloudinary is a platform that we can use to handle image and video in our projects. The talk is not related to any of these three last products. We will talk about Storyblok, but if you want to talk about any of these topics or any other thing, you can contact me. My Twitter handle is Facundo Zurdo and my website is fgiuliani.com. So let's start with the definition of what a content management system is. It is an application used to create and manage digital content. With these platforms, we will have an admin interface that content editors, content creators, and other users can log in and use to generate content that will be used for web projects. This content will be integrated with a database and managed all by the content management system, and the same platform will offer us a view layer, a presentation layer, where we can use this content created in the backend and expose it as a website using a certain presentation layer defined by the platform. Here we can see that it's very cool because we are using a platform not only for the content editors that will generate the content that we will display in our website, but also we are making the work easier for the developers because they will be able to handle this content and expose it in the website using a certain presentation layer. But here is the issue that after several years, some people started to analyze, because we have this view layer, this presentation layer, but we are tied to a certain technology or a certain programming language to present the content that is being generated in the backend. And that it's okay, but on the other hand, if we want to use another programming language or another framework or a different way of presenting the content, we won't be able to do that with the platform, with the content management system, as we are forced to use the technology that was defined by the creators of the content management system. So after evaluating this scenario, some people came up with the idea of a headless content management system, which is a CMS where the content repository is separated or decoupled from the presentation layer. So in this case, we will have an admin interface, a control panel, let's say, where the users can go and create and edit content, and this content will be stored in a database and managed by the content management system, but the platform will expose an API that we can use to connect to it and to consume the content without being forced to a certain presentation layer. So in this case, we will have all the backend generated so the users can create the content, but we will be able to use the content generated once in different channels or different presentation layers, like websites using different programming languages and frameworks, but also we will be able to use the same content for mobile applications, desktop applications, or even applications for smart devices, like smartwatches or the Amazon Alexa device, etc. So here we can see that we have some differences between a monolithic or a traditional content management system, that's how we call the first case that we mentioned, and on the other hand, the Headless CMS. So this new way of thinking, the CMSs, are decoupled the front end and the back end. So we have a back end that we can use to generate the content and maintain it and save it. But on the other hand, the front end will be defined by the developers that are consuming the content. So they will be able to use different programming languages or frameworks and not being tied to a certain technology. That is why we are having more flexibility in our projects, because we won't be tied to certain rules to follow when presenting the content that is being generated. Doing this, we will have a better developer experience and user experience. The developers will be able to create the projects following the guidelines and the technologies that they want to use. And on the other hand, the content editors will get advantage of a cool admin panel and a cool backend to create the content, and after they create and edit that content, expose it to the final users. And also we will have the possibility of creating omni-channel experiences, because the content that we are generating can be used in different devices or channels, like, as we said, applications, websites, etc. Today, we will focus on Storyblok. Storyblok is a headless CMS which offers two main features or two main differentiators with other headless CMSs. Storyblok offers a visual editor, so the content editors and content creators can see in real time how the content is going to look like before it is published and deployed to the production environment. And on the other hand, Storyblok also offers a component approach. The content that is going to be generated in the platform will be organized in the way of reusable components, following something similar to the well-known atomic design, where we can have components that have other components inside of them in a nested architecture. And we can reuse these components in different pages or different parts of our projects. Doing this, we can divide our pages in different components, like a header, a hero, a slider, a footer, and we can use these components in more than one page. We are not forced to define the structure of each one of the pages that we are creating on our website. This is in the case that we are working on a web project. Doing this, we have the possibility of creating components not only in the CMS, in the headless CMS, but also in the front end of our application, like using React components, and linking them. So in the content management system, we will be able to organize the content in a certain way, but on the other hand, we will be able to consume that content in the front end in a form of React components and creating a visual representation for the content that is being generated in the headless CMS, but not being tied to use a certain technology or framework. And on the other hand, we are giving the possibility to the content editors to reuse these structures, these components, in different parts of the project. Let's see a quick demo, so probably we will understand better the idea. Here we are seeing a blog. This is the home page of my blog site. You can see that I have an image at the top. I have different icons here. And I have related posts where I can see the blog posts that were written and created for my blog in the platform, right? I can click on this blog and see the content that was created with the text of the articles and etc., the image for the blogs and all the details. I can also click on the link blog here and we can see that we have a different page where we have again the blogs that were created on the platform. And this is a React application. But what we are doing here is using components linking to other components that were generated in a Headless CMS. In this case, the Headless CMS is Storyblok. And what we mentioned is that we have the possibility in Storyblok to visually express how the content is going to look like before it's deployed, before it's published. So let's go to the Headless CMS, to Storyblok. This is the Storyblok application. You can see here that I'm connecting to my local host, and here I see the same website that we were just seeing. I connected the content management system to the local instance of my application. And here I can see some lines, and on the right hand side I have the components that are inside this page, my page. So these components are the teaser with the image, a grid of icon, and then I have a feature post type of component with all the content that I generated. What is cool about Storyblok is that we can edit the content on the fly and see how it's going to look like before deploying that to production or before affecting the content that was generated in the Headless CMS and that is stored and being consumed by our application. So in this case, I can click on a component in the real-time visual editor, and I can see on the right-hand side the properties of each one of these components. In this case, I clicked on the teaser, and the teaser has a headline and an image. I have the properties here, and what I can do is edit the properties and see in real time how it's going to look like. Here you can see that I changed the title, and I can see in the visual editor how it is going to look like. I have a page where I can go and see the property body, which contains a list of blocks which are dynamic blocks because we are not forcing here the user to select or put a particular type of blocks, and we have different types of blocks inside of it. You can see here that I have a grid that when clicking we have a green border here, and the grid has 3 features inside of it. This is because we are working with nested components, as I mentioned before. We can click on any of these features and we can again change the content to see how it's going to look like when we publish these changes to production. We can do that in real time and see that we have a grid with features. This is another type of component. Here we have the related posts. I can click here, and in the related post again I can change the properties and see in real time how it's going to look like. I can select the blog post that I want to display here, and I'm doing this without clicking any save button, and I'm not affecting the content. We have the possibility of doing that even before we save and we generate a draft version of the content, or we generate the version that we are going to publish, the final version of the page, let's say. So besides working with the components that are already added to the page, I have the possibility of adding new blocks. You see here that I have different types of blocks to select. These are the blocks that I define in the Headless CMS. I mean, these are structures that are not tied to any particular format or any visual representation. What we are seeing in the left-hand side is the code and the style that was defined in the front end of my React application that is using and consuming the content that is coming from Storyblok API And based on the details and the information that is coming from the platform, we use that to set the style of the pages that I am creating. Here I added a new block. I can click on it and add some new text so we can see how it's going to look like. We can even change the order of the components here and see in real time how it will look like when we published. We can duplicate components and add it to the same page. We can put, again, change the properties, the values of the properties. And we have this flexibility because Storyblok is connecting to our React application using a JavaScript file called Storyblok bridge. Including this JavaScript file in all our HTML files or all the pages that we will have in our website, what we are doing is adding some event handlers that we can catch from the code of our front end, from the code of our React application. And whenever that event is happening on the real-time visual editor of Storyblok, we can add some logic and content in our application to display the changes in real time, the changes that we are applying to our page, well, to the content that we are consuming to display on our page. So to do that, we have this Storyblok bridge JavaScript file that we are including. And besides that, to make the work easier, we have some NPM packages that we can use in our React application. So let's go to the code of this application that I am running now. You can see here, this is a React application that I created with the components, some library, and, well, the general application file. Here, I'm seeing the package.json file because I wanted to show you the two NPM packages that I just mentioned. One is called Storyblok Editable. This is the one that we are going to use to wrap our React components to tell the application and to tell Storyblok Visual Editor that these components are clickable and editable in the visual editor. And the other NPM package is called Storyblok.js client. This client will allow us to consume information from Storyblok REST API. And we can use that information to populate the front end of our application. I will go now to the application, the app file. And you can see here that whenever we visit a page, no matter which page, we are going to create only one file for the application and not one file per page. You can see that we are grabbing the slug, which is the path name of the page that we are visiting. And with that slug, we are sending that as a parameter to use Storyblok React hook that we created and that I will show you the code later. This use Storyblok hook will return us a story. That is how we call the pages in Storyblok story, because even though the concept is very similar to a web page, we can use that story on other places of our project, or even we can create applications that don't have web pages. So we call them stories. When we receive information related to any story, what we are going to generate is a general layout, which is a React component that includes a dynamic component that can contain a story or a page, or it can receive as a parameter a block or a component. In this case, we are sending all the content related to a story. So let's see in this Storyblok.js file that I generated with the helper. Here you can see that we are using the Storyblok client coming from Storyblok.js client npm package that I mentioned before. We are instantiating this Storyblok client in our page with the access token to connect to the Storyblok space that I was using on Storyblok application. And we will use this Storyblok client to connect to the REST API of Storyblok to consume the content generated in the platform. You can see that we are creating the use Storyblok React hook here that is receiving the slug as a parameter. In this case, we are setting an initial state of the story or the page that we will be handling. And here we have an init event listeners that it is what I mentioned before, the event handlers that we will have when we connect our React application to the Storyblok real-time visual editor. Here we are verifying if we have the Storyblok bridge in our page. If we don't have a Storyblok bridge in our page, we are going to instantiate a new one, a new Storyblok bridge that is coming from this function. Here what we are seeing is adding to the document a new Storyblok bridge JavaScript file, which is a JavaScript file with the source of this path. This is where the Storyblok bridge is living. You don't need to download it or include it to your project. You can consume that directly from this URL. We are adding the Storyblok bridge so it is available on all the pages that we will generate on our website. And once that we have this Storyblok bridge, we are sending some parameters here, but the idea is on the event handlers that we have here, whenever we change or we publish a story, that means whenever we save and we generate a draft version or a published version, which are the ones that I mentioned before, we are going to reload the page that we are visiting. But the most important part here is this piece of code. Whenever an input event is happening on the visual editor, that means that a content editor is changing the value of a property or changing a component or adding a new block or a new component to a page or deleting one, we will receive a story from that event, and that's the story that we are setting to the page that we are seeing. This is what is going to do that we show in real time all the changes that are being applied to the pages that we are modifying inside the application. On the other hand, we have another event that we will handle, which is enter edit mode, and this event is happening when we load the visual editor in Storyblok. What we are going to do at that moment is receive a story ID, and using the Storyblok client that we created before, we are getting all the information related to the story that we are visiting inside the visual editor. When we receive the information related to that story, we are sharing that story on the page that we are seeing. So we load in the first time the complete content of the page that we are seeing inside the visual editor. And that will be available to be edited, and whenever we edit it, a new input event will happen. So this is the code that we are going to use. We see, you see here that we are again loading all the information related to the story. That is happening in the case that we are not working inside the visual editor, but we are visiting the page on our local host, for instance. We set the story with the information that is coming from the Storyblok client again. And if we are in preview mode, let's say that's a flag that you can manage in the code of your application, we are adding the Storyblok bridge. So we are able to load the visual editor and work on it. One thing that we saw on the application is the dynamic component, which is a React component. You can see in the code of the dynamic component that what we are doing is listing several React components that we have inside our application. These components, we are generating a list of the React component being linked to a type of component. This is a value that is coming from Storyblok API. So when we receive all the information related to a page or a story or a component of a block from the Storyblok API, if we are loading this dynamic component, we will analyze that block, and based on the type of component of that block, we will verify if we have the visual representation in a form of a React component available for that type of component. And we will return the React component loading the information for that particular component. So in the case of the page that we are loading, we will receive from the API a page, which is a React component, and you can see here that we have the markup for the page that we are loading, which is a main with a body, and we will analyze the body. This is the same body that we saw before in Storyblok application, and for each block inside the body, we will again render a dynamic component. And we have dynamic components for all the component types that we are handling inside our Storyblok space or Storyblok project. You can see that if we go back to the application, we have teaser, text, grid, featured posts. These are the types of components that we are handling in our space. If I go to my React application, you can see that I have a React component for the teaser with some markup and style, CSS styling here, and we are adding this SB editable function that is coming from the Storyblok editable npm package that I mentioned before. So we are able to click and edit them inside the visual editor. And on the other hand, we have the markup for each one of these components, and we are using the information that is coming from the API related to this block or this component. Here we have the headline, here we have an image tag where we are using the file name and the alt text for that image, and you can double check in Storyblok application that for a teaser I have a headline and an image with the URL of the image that I'm going to use in my project. For the text component, I only have a text property. So if I go here to my project, you can see that I have a text React component where I'm returning the markup and the style for that text, and I'm using the text property to be rendered inside of the div. The same if I go to the grid, we have a grid with 3 feature components inside of it. So if I go to my React project, you will see that I have a grid here, which is a list. We have the columns of the block that I'm loaded, and for each column, I will load a dynamic component because, again, I don't know which component can it be, as inside Storyblok, I have the possibility of adding any component. But in the case of our example, we have feature components. So I can go to the code of a feature, and you can see that for a feature, we are loading other markup, and we are using the name and the description that is coming from the features of the component that we are creating inside Storyblok. So you should create here one React component per component type that we are handling and creating in our Storyblok space to have the visual representation for them, and having a dynamic component to load them, since we are adding the flexibility to the content editor to add any component to the pages that we are creating in the Headless CMS. So in this case, we have the advantage of using a great user experience and user interface for the content editors, and the possibility of using new frameworks and programming languages like React and JavaScript to consume that content and expose that on our projects and applications. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to the first link on this slide, where you can learn more about what a headless CMS is and more concepts related to that. If you go to the second link of the slide, you can learn more about Storyblok Visual Editor and how to use it. In the third link, you will see the code, the GitHub repository of the Storyblok editable NPM package that we use today. Or if you want to learn more about Storyblok itself, you want to see guides, tutorials, or how to connect Storyblok with other frameworks and programming languages, you can go to the last link on this slide. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Enjoy the conference. And if you want to contact me, my Twitter handle is Facundo Zurdo and my website is fgiuliani.com. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Hey, welcome back. Thank you, Facundo, for this awesome presentation. It was really, really interesting. I've got a couple of questions for you. So let's dive in this Q&A session. Dear attendees, if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to ask Facundo in the Q&A tab on the open platform. So yeah, first question. What would be the typical use case where you prefer to use a headless CMS rather than a regular, I don't know, regular database or another kind of a backend system for your data?
Cool. So yeah, I would say that a headless CMS is very helpful in the case where we need, the person that will maintain the content that we will offer in our platform, in our website, is not the same that the people that is developing the product or the website, right? So for instance, if we are managing a news portal or a blog where we need people creating the content to expose in the website, in the web application, that will be one team of our organization probably, and we will need, or we will have another team that will be the one developing the platform itself and the code of the application, and we need the content team or the content teams not to depend on tasks that should be executed from the developers or the IT department. So we will have a faster deployment of the content and a faster workflow and interaction inside the organization. Another example would be an e-commerce platform. For instance, there are some new e-commerce platform that you can implement and start using. And if you need to load information about the products that you are offering in the e-commerce platform, you will probably have people writing and creating the content, and that won't be the same people that will maintain the platform working, right?
Yeah, okay. So it's it could be seen as a separation of concerns between the data by itself, the content, and helping to spread the responsibility over different teams in your overall organization.
Yes, that's what I would do. That's where I think that we can get the most advantage of the product, right? Probably the developers have an easier or faster way of creating the content and expose it in a web application. But when that when that gets bigger and bigger, or we need other people that is not fully related with the technology to be creating and maintaining the content, probably that's not the best solution. And we can get with a headless CMS, Storyblok or any other headless CMS, we can get the possibility of offering a friendly user interface to create and maintain the content. And I think that that's where the headless CMSs in particular get the most advantage, right?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got another great question from Anton. He's asking about internationalization and localization. So with a headless UI or a headless CMS like Storyblok, what what is the behaviors, the skills of those kind of platforms for the internationalization purposes? Is there any best practices or common rules?
Cool. So yeah, I imagine that it depends on which headless CMS you are using. In the particular case of Storyblok, there are two types of managing and handling internationalization. One of them is linking the pages that we create inside the headless CMS and having different versions depending on the localization area that we need or the language that we need in our website or our project. So let's say that we support 10 different languages. We will have 10 different versions of the same page, but in Storyblok we have two possibilities of managing the content. One is translation at a field level. That's how we call it. So you can change the properties of these components that we were seeing in the example for each one of the languages. So if you need to manage English, Italian, French, Spanish, you can translate the text and the properties of each one of the components for each one of the languages. And the other possibility is linking different versions of the pages with different components or structures. So let's say that for Italy, for instance, you want to expose a certain structure of the page with some components, with some schema, and for other languages, you want to expose the same page but with other components or other structure. You can do that. I encourage you to write me and we can chat about that. But there are some tutorials that you can follow to do that on the platform, and that's one another of the benefits that I think that you can manage with Headless CMS.
Okay, that's great. And is specifically asking about the left to right and right to left properties. Is it also something that you could easily personalize in the headless CMS to grab those properties and the components by themselves when they run the content after?
So I think I'm not following you. What
Yeah,
do you mean with the?
because some languages are using a specific text orientation, like the right to left orientation. Is it something we could also contribute in the headless CMS?
So I think that would depend on how you are exposing the content that you are creating, right? I mean, how you are managing or programming the front end, probably. I mean, the way that you create the content and insert the text for the properties in the headless CMS is using like regular HTML elements, and depending on how you grab the value of these properties and how you display it will depend on how it's the front end created, right?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Okay. Another question we have is about the performances and how could we take care of the performances or improve the speed and the performances of our website or our final application when implementing a headless CMS?
Cool. So, I mean, now we saw an example using plain React, let's call it in that way, and how to create a React application linking to a headless CMS. The truth is that if we are managing platforms like a blog, for instance, or a news portal, we have ways of generating the content ahead of time. I mean, before the users visit our pages, at build time, executing a process to generate static assets. So we have some frameworks like Next.js or Gatsby, where we can use React to generate static assets, static pages at build time that will be visited by the users and the visitors in the future. So for instance, in the case that we were seeing in the demo, we can generate each one of these pages at build time using a framework like Next.js, for instance. So doing this, we will have an static page. So when the users visit our website, they won't need to generate the HTML content on the fly using a client-side rendering application, like a React application using like a single page application. And we will have the content already rendered as a static page, that the only thing that the browser has to do is to download the static page and see the content. So that will be faster, easier to maintain. We can get advantage of the cache of the servers that we are using to host the applications and the pages. So those are some techniques that we can use to get more performance or faster websites, let's say.
Okay, so it's perfectly compatible with static site generators. I do love static site generators. So yeah,
Yeah, me
really
too.
good.
Me too. I'm a big fan.
Really good use case. So, okay, awesome. That was really great and really cool to have you today. Thank you very much for being here for this new edition. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. I enjoy being here again. Thank you very much. And well, it would be great if we can in person next year in Italy, traveling there.
Yeah, I hope to see you next year. So thank you for having this great presentation with us, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye, ciao,
Sure.
ciao.